everyone, welcome back to Mad About Cards and Crafts and another not too shabby shop design team project. Today I'm combining two of my favorite things when it comes to card making, critters and florals. Let's jump into the products that I'm using today. From CC Designs, I have this Skunks stamp set. There's 6 adorable skunks and 2 sentiments. The Corner Garden stamp set is from LDRS Creative. The Brocade Stencil, LDRS Creative, and finally Pretty Pattern Slimline. I'll be using the 2 slimline dies. I'm stamping out all of the skunks that were in the CC Designs stamp set using some VersaFine ink, Versamark ink in black onyx. I wanted to do some heat embossing because I thought that it would really help that black stand out on these images. I have some clear embossing powder and I did stamp onto Copic Express paper. You can see that there's a little bit of an image on that last skunk on the right. That's because I misstamped, my paper shifted just a little bit and I had to turn it over and re-stamp again. I'm going to heat set this and melt that embossing powder with my heat tool, and we're going to do some Copic coloring. As you can see, I did color each of my skunks a little bit darker and lighter. I tried to vary the colors on them because no 2 skunks are going to look alike. For this particular skunk, I started with a C7 on the tail, I blended it out with a C5, and then finally where the white space was, I added a C3 for the body. I am going to do the same thing for the face. I will use a lighter combination because his face would be, I didn't want it as dark. So I went with a C3, C1, and a C0 marker. And I may have used a little bit of C1 on the tail as well. I do have all of the caps up on the screen. For the darker skunk, so the skunk that's raising his hand as like he's saying hello, I used a C9, C7, C5, and C3 combination for that skunk, and I pretty much kept the dark tones throughout his entire body. I'm going to color the cheeks in with my R20 marker. And for the eyes, I am going to use a B1 marker. When I go around the eyes, it's, you know, your eyes have the color and then you have the black and then you have your the pupil, and so I wanted to go ahead and just add a little bit of white. I added a little bit of darkness around that white area with my Copic marker just to define the eyes a little bit more. This is the beautiful Corner Garden stamp from LDRS Creative. I'm starting with a green combination. My darkest color at the base of these leaves is going to be a G7. I'll come at the tip towards the center with a G5, and then I'll blend everything out with a G2. I did heat emboss these images the exact same way because I did want to have cohesiveness in the design, and by adding that embossing powder, it just makes the image pop even more. I do not have the dies for either of these sets, so I will cut them out using my brother's Scan and Cut. I do this quite frequently with LDRS Creative. If you've never been over to their store or you've never checked out their supplies in the Not Too Shabby shop, their florals especially are very compatible with critters. I love to combine the two. I think there's just a little bit of a whimsical feel to them, and especially on this one, when I start adding the white gel pen, it really not only makes the image pop, but it adds that little bit of touch of whimsy. Sometimes florals are super elegant and it's really hard to get them to work with critters, but the illustrations with LDRS Creative is just perfect. For the pinks on those florals, I used an RV combination, I believe an RV, maybe a 14, 13, and 11. And then for these larger flowers, I'm going with a blue combination. So the darkest on the inside of the flower was going to be a B18, and then I'm going around the edges right now with a B16. I'll blend that out with a B12, and it's just a little bit lighter than what I was looking for. I'll end up adding a B14 coming in from the edge of the petals more towards the center, and then I'll go over everything with my B12, and that will just give me a little bit more depth in the color, a little bit more contrast, and I like it a little bit better. This was just a little bit lighter than what I was looking for. There is a different leaf, as you can see on the bottom left and right of this image. I will use a single marker. I think it's a YG13, and I just go with that one color. I didn't think that the leaves were large enough for me to need to do much blending on that, so I kept it pretty simple. All of the products that I've used will be linked in the description box below. I'll link them first in the Not Too Shabby shop if they are available, and then I'll link them at either LDRS or CC Designs if they're not in the Not Too Shabby shop. I have the die, the Pretty Patterns die. As I mentioned, I'm using both the outside and the inside slimline piece. I'm going to line these up, and then I'm going to run it through on using my Anna Griffin Empress. I always want to say Express it because of Copic paper. Empress die cutting machine, the mini machine. I'm going to angle this just slightly, and I'll run it through twice to make sure that I get all those little tiny hearts cut out. I really love this die set from LDRS Creative. There are several squares, a lift, a flap, a couple circles, so you can really change the look, but I really love those little hearts. I started with an 8.5 by 3.5 inch slimline card base. This is 80-pound cardstock, and I'm going to add my frame to this panel. It's going to give me a 1/4 inch border all the way around. I am going to have that inside piece, so the inside piece that cut out from that blue, and I can use that on a separate project. Once I get this down, I'm going to do what we call a dry fit, and I'm going to lay everything out. And it's at this point that I decide that I want to do a little bit of heat embossing. So I'm going to bring in some Pink Fresh Studio Blue Jay ink, and I'm going to bring in the sentiment that says friends make happiness bloom. As I dry fit this, I'm trying to figure out where I want my critters to be so that it best suits the design for my sentiment. And then I'll use my Misti to stamp my image. I do stamp the sentiment twice, and then off camera, I stamped it a 3rd time using my embossing ink. I wanted that shine that I had on the flowers and on my critters. I thought that it was just looking a little bit flat. Plus I knew that I was going to use that Brocade stencil. As you can see, I have a stark white background, and I didn't want that. I wanted to add just a little bit more texture and interest to the background, and so that stencil is going to help me do that. By adding that heat embossing over the top, it will allow me to stencil without blending into the sentiment. As I mentioned, this heat embossing, or I may not have mentioned, this heat embossing right here is going to really warp this cardstock. This is very inexpensive 80-pound cardstock. I'm going to end up off camera just cutting it in half, so cutting that top layer off and adding it to a new card base to make sure that I really have a nice clean card. This stencil is not continuous, so I am going to have a little bit of white space. I blended on the left side with that same Blue Jay, and then I added it to the right side. And to cover it up, so you see that white space, I wasn't worried about that because I knew that the floral was going to cover it up, but I do end up moving my little skunk more to, on the right hand side, more to the left so that I can cover up a little bit more of that white space. So it's moved over just a little bit more than my dry fitting had it, and it still turned out really nice. I've added some foam tape to the back of both of my images, and I'm going to use my Barely Art glue to make sure that I have just a few moments to move these around in case I want to. I typically don't press things down really hard, but you know, when I'm initially putting them on my card panel, but I wanted to really make sure that I had time for those to move if I didn't like where that skunk on the right was. Here I'm using my Misti just to help me align it to my card panel, and we're going to add accents to our leaves. We'll add some to our skunks. So you can see I've already added a little bit to the skunk on the left. I'm going to add a little bit more to the tails. So I started with some dots on this leaf, and then for the smaller leaves at the bottom, I'm going to add some lines. This is a number 10 gel pen. And then I thought that the flowers just needed a little bit more of that whimsical look as I was talking about. So I'm going to add dots to the center of each of those flowers, and that will finish off my card for today. So I really love, as I mentioned, the mixture of the florals and these adorable images from CC Designs. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Leave me a comment and let me know if you like mixing florals with your critters. And until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Thanks so much for watching.